You are listening to Insights from the Conference Board.
Hello, my name is Camilla Andretta, Research Analyst in Human Capital at the Conference Board, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Insights, a series which helps talent executives address challenges and stay informed about current issues across the entire spectrum of human capital. This series is brought to you by the Conference Board. Today, I will be sitting down with Marion Devine, who is Senior Researcher in Human Capital at the Conference Board, to discuss the main trends in human capital that stand out in our 2022 C-Suite Outlook. For those who do not know about it, the C-Suite survey is now in its 23rd edition, and this year it collected the inputs from 917 CEOs, 12% of which were based in Europe. So, Marion, welcome. Let's start with the top internal issues that CEOs will focus on in 2022. Globally, and for European CEOs as well, the top priority is talent attraction and retention. So, Marion, how do you think companies will support this need to focus on talent?
Yes, thank you, Camilla. Yeah, I think that it's really interesting that in keeping with previous years, we have a really strong global consensus, not just in Europe, but a global consensus among CEOs on the need to focus on talent. And it seems that this is just a perennial issue. It never goes away. Companies are utterly dependent on the talent of their people to be successful. So as we go into 2022, what do we think is going to happen in Europe? Well, we've heard about the Great Resignation in the States. And so, of course, we are sort of thinking, well, are we going to see this here where employees are going to sort of decide that actually they think their prospects are pretty good and they'll resign and look for other jobs? So we think there are some sort of signs that actually the need to focus on talent is going to be really important in 2022 in Europe. And it's really because we see the economies in Europe are starting to recover. You know, we are seeing signs of growth. We are seeing signs of increased confidence within businesses when it comes to their hiring intentions. We're seeing an increase in confidence in some of the surveys we've been doing into individuals' sort of confidence and expectations. And so there's definitely a sense that things are going to be moving. And I think the question for organizations in Europe is to say, well, what's happened in the last 2 years? We've had all these schemes in place where we've kept jobs. People have been dealing with the pandemic. We know there's such a lot of exhaustion, uncertainty. And so, you know, we've had 2 years where people haven't really moved. Perhaps they haven't progressed either in their careers. We certainly haven't seen rises in salaries. And it could be that, you know, we're going to see in Europe a workforce that is starting to question more, sort of saying, you know, what's my next move? Am I going to get promotion? Is my salary going to go up? Should I be thinking about moving? So I think that although we don't think we're going to see a massive sort of shift in terms of the Great Resignation in Europe, we are certainly going to see a tighter labour market. And I think this focus on talent is going to be absolutely critical for European companies. I think they're going to have to really think about the needs of their workforce and actually actively engage their workforce. I think they really want to be saying to their workforce, to their most talented workers, about their needs and their wants. And I think one of the things that we're seeing in Europe already is definitely that the growing demand for flexibility, flexible working hours. And so I think companies really do need to respond to that, because with all of us working remotely, I think we've really started to understand that how we work and when we work is less important. We have to deliver the goods, meet our targets, you know, meet our customer expectations, but actually how and when we do it and where we do it is less important. So I think there's been a real shift. And so that's one thing that companies might really well have to think about. And I think that talented workers of all ages, from the research we're doing, talented workers of all ages do want more flexibility. So I think that, yeah, Camilla, I think that this is a really important issue, and it could mean higher wages. We do think there's going to be pressure on wages, definitely. But I think that we've seen again and again in past big, you know, competitions for talent, that higher wages is a very short-term strategy. If you really want to attract, retain, engage talented workers, you do have to do a whole lot more. And it is around really offering them, you know, something about your company that makes them want to join and makes them want to stay.
Thank you, Marion. This is really interesting, but there are also other important factors that contribute to a strong culture and to employee engagement. Thinking about creating an inclusive environment for employees.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's something that we asked in our C-suite outlook. We did ask what are sort of the priority strategies for talent. And it's interesting, there are some differences in what CEOs emphasize and what human capital, CHROs emphasize. I think that it's interesting that CEOs are really sort of thinking about agile teams, offering talented people very varied and stretching work through agile teams. So the whole sort of point about agile teams is that it's very project based. Those teams shift. It's very much about empowering the team, bringing the decision making to the level of the team, letting them very much decide how best to organize themselves. It's the emphasis on innovation, or the emphasis on going to the customer, getting feedback, working iteratively, experimentation. And I think that certainly in Europe, the interest in sort of an agile ways of working is actually one of the strongest of interests in our global survey. So I think there's this appreciation that, again, to really engage talented workers, it is about organizing the work that is going to be more agile, that there are going to be opportunities for really being stretching and bringing your best to the work. But I think as well, this whole area around culture. So CEOs do sort of say globally, strengthening organizational culture to retain talent. They put that in their fourth place. But actually, CHROs put that as second. So CHROs, people who head up the talent and people strategies in organizations in Europe, really think that strengthening the organizational culture, retain talent, is absolutely priority. And I think that this means, again, about, as you say, Camilla, inclusiveness. We know that people really want inclusive environments where they can feel respected, they can feel that they can speak up, they can bring their authentic self to work. And I think especially in COVID as well, I think a lot of us have really realised the importance of feeling connected, the importance of feeling belonging, that sense of belonging, because it's been so much harder in COVID. So I think that the whole thing of a strong, enduring and attractive culture is actually going to be really important, because in some ways, perhaps some of us feel we've lost it, and it's sort of re-emphasized again, that huge importance. So I do think that perhaps CHROs will have a little bit of a job on their hands to actually get the CEO to maybe prioritize it a little bit more, but really think about the culture that they're offering to their talented workers.
Thank you, Marion. And then looking at other results, there is an interesting difference between CEOs globally and European CEOs on developing the next generation of leaders. Indeed, while this is among the top 5 issues globally, it is ranked only 7th by European CEOs. Why do you think this is the case, Marion?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Camilla, because every year developing the next generation of leaders is always pretty much in the top 3. Now, I think what's happening here is, I don't think it's actually saying that leadership is less important for European CEOs. I think it's actually that other things have been pressing, and I think that talent issues have been really pressing. We've been holding conversations about leadership, and especially leadership after COVID. We really don't think that it's a low priority. I think companies are really starting to think about it, starting to think about the organizations they want to build after COVID. But I think going back to the thing about talent, I think that finding is very closely aligned with the fact that in Europe, a top priority in terms of business strategies is digital transformation. And we know that the digital transformation that COVID has absolutely really speeded up this shift towards digital processes, digital structures, ways of working with customers. And at the conference board, our definition of digital transformation is about how you use digital technologies to make new connections, to create new connections with your stakeholders, with your customers, going to the market differently. So it's really about sort of leveraging those technologies to connect people, physical assets, processes in new ways, and possibly to transform your business model. So in Europe, we know that digital transformation is it's a top priority for our CEOs. And I think that this is because, COVID has accelerated the transition to e-commerce. So many companies were forced in COVID to find new ways to get to their customers, to talk to their customers. Your customers couldn't come into a shop and choose their paint. You had to create a new forum online. You had to be able to connect with them, perhaps digitally in the case of one of our companies, and actually talk to them on a webcam, look at their sitting room, talk to them about paint colours, different ways of working, and companies have had to be very creative. So I think that this has really accelerated the shift to digital ways of working, e-commerce, digital ways of connecting and building conversation and interactions with customers. So I think that, again, that ties in with the emphasis on talent, because we really are seeing a bit of a crunch in terms of some of the new skills that we need in European companies. So this is, we are seeing that accelerating trend towards automation, AI, data connectivity, cloud storage, computing. We know from our own research that all these areas grew fastest during the pandemic. And so that has really created a massive demand for advanced technological skills from workers. And we know that as technology diffuses across the organization at all levels, from high to low skills, there's hardly any employee that's not going to be touched by this. We just need digital literacy in all areas for all workers, really. But I think as well, the interesting thing that we've seen with this whole emphasis on digital transformation is as well that there's a demand for complementary human or soft skills. It's not all digital skills. There are some soft skills that we know that people need. And again, that's because we're trying to connect with customers in new ways. We're shifting to a more stakeholder perspective. So it's about working differently and listening and having dialogue and getting closer to customers. So there's a whole sort of area of soft skills and cognitive skills that are really needed. So these are some really big demands for companies. So I think, again, hence the big focus on talent. I think just finally to add that in some future of jobs survey that we did, I think that there are some interesting clues about, first of all, we found that some of the top skills that are needed are things like analytical thinking, skills in innovation, but also leadership and social influence, and also active learning strategies, critical thinking and analysis. So they were the sort of the top four. And one of the things that we did ask employers is how are they going to sort of help people acquire some of these new skills? And what was interesting was the top two strategies, 95% of the employers in this survey said retrain existing employees, number one. Number two, and also get existing employees to pick up new skills on the job. So I think that's a really interesting thing, that companies realise that there's some of those skills that they need out there aren't there, and they're going to have to really think about upskilling their employees to adopt some of the new skills, but also reskilling some employees who perhaps are in jobs that are definitely on the decline, but they have transferable skills, and employers are working to identify how they can help them transfer to career paths that have a bit more longevity.
Yeah, we are definitely living in interesting times. But going back 1 second to leaders, we ran some focus groups with around 30 European human capital executives, and we also heard from 40 CHROs globally on the topic of leadership. Would you like to share with us what we are seeing in terms of leadership right now?
Yes, definitely. Well, I think, Camilla, again, we're seeing this real emphasis among European leaders on the whole thing of sort of really agile working and shifting to teams and shifting to really empowered teams. So our leaders, I think they felt that as we come out of the pandemic, that the sort of how of leadership is really important. They spoke about empathy, about being authentic as leaders. One memorable quote for me was a leader who said, you have to rethink, what does it mean to be a leader when everybody is seeing into your home? They're seeing your children come in. They're seeing the room behind you. They're seeing your pets wander through. And you can't sort of hide behind titles and posh offices. It's about, how do I still come across as an authentic leader? What does it mean to be an authentic leader? So I think there's been a really interesting sort of rethinking about what does it mean to be a leader, and how do leaders demonstrate sort of leadership? How do they influence? And I think as well that a strong message from our research was this sense that companies have gone through crisis, they've gone through prolonged uncertainty, and the need to really focus on culture, which again is in our C-suite challenge outlook results. And leaders have a vital role to play in being the ambassadors of culture, especially when perhaps more and more of their workforce are dispersed, perhaps working some of the time from home. And so it's about really kind of, I think there is a reassessment going on about saying, well, what is the culture that we want to see? What role are our leaders playing in really promoting and championing and articulating that culture? And how can we show that culture when so many things have been disrupted and changed? And again, if you are as an employee, perhaps you work in a really prestigious headquarters, perhaps in Paris, and as you walk through the door, everywhere you look, you are reminded of, yes, I work for this company, and the branding of that company, the culture is all around you. Well, how does that translate when a lot of people now are working from home, and maybe people are going to be permanently much more remote? So I think that companies are really thinking about this, and they're looking with renewed attention at what does it mean to be a leader? How do you demonstrate and act out that culture? And again, I think post-pandemic, the appreciation that, yes, there's this big shift to digital working and digital technologies, but actually there's also a big shift to sort of saying, that work has to be human shaped. It has to be human centric. And, if we're trying to work with customers in new ways and building, new types of relationships with customers, it's equally important that we look after our employees, that we have that strong culture as well internally, that people do feel connected, they do feel, very aligned with the cultural values of the organization. So I think leaders are, it's an interesting time for leadership, and I think it's a demanding time for leaders as well.
Yeah, definitely. And finally, one of the special topics of this year's C-suite survey was hybrid work, because we are not returning to the world of work that we knew before the pandemic, because the workplace, the nature of work, worker sentiment, and workers' expectations, they have radically changed. And in Europe, according to the survey, a third of CEOs expect around 40% of employees to work remotely at least 3 days a week once the pandemic subsides, which is a significant change compared to pre-pandemic. And this transition clearly presents some challenges. And European CEOs are well aware that the hybrid model will require a significant change in corporate culture. And also, compared to CEOs globally, European CEOs seem to be particularly worried that corporate culture may dilute in this new world of work. That's quite interesting, Marion, isn't it?
Yes, that's a great question, Camilla. I think that very plainly, yes, we're seeing this permanent shift to hybrid workforces, but a hybrid workplace is not without its challenges, but its opportunities as well. So we did see that respondents in Europe really do fear a decrease in the quality of internal relationships, internal collaborations, and CEOs in Europe are particularly worried about the dilution of culture. So I think that there is going to be a strong focus in 2022 among European companies to say, well, how can we connect remote employees, not just sort of to just the relationships, internal relationships, but to that bigger picture, the mission, the purpose of the business. And that is going to be, I think, really, really putting a focus on leaders' communication skills. As I said as well, this whole thing that we've seen in our more recent work with leaders about communicating very clearly the culture of the organization. How are you going to do that in a hybrid context? So we think it is going to be very much about looking actively for any and every opportunity in your interactions with your employees, with your teams, to really convey culture. So it's being much more intentional. Things that sort of happen accidentally, you kind of will have to make them happen. So in terms of informal communications, formal communications, and something that might be really useful as well is when it comes to formal communications is looking for storytelling, looking for some of those anecdotes, some of those stories that really are going to absolutely enshrine some of your corporate values. And it might well be that the pandemic, with some of the very dramatic events going on, maybe there are some really great stories there that you can reach out to your leaders, to also, you know, your workers, and get some of those stories going. So I think that's going to be sort of really important. I think that in terms of how leaders lead in a hybrid workforce, they are definitely, we know that there is going to be some specific skills, for example, setting a clear direction for what's ahead, really clarifying direction, clarifying, you know, strategic priorities. I think with many teams working remotely and business conditions are changing rapidly, the need for the leader to keep setting direction, just reminding, just sort of, you know, just realigning people all the time is going to become really, really critical. There's going to be as well this need to understand how to sort of contract with your virtual and remote team to maintain work standards and boundaries and output. So just sort of really working out how to do that in a way that's consistent, but obviously not too heavy-handed. You know, it will need leaders to just adapt, to set expectations, to convey those expectations. I do think, though, that companies need to be very wary of looking to technology to help manage, to help manage and monitor. I think that technology can definitely help, but we need, in Europe, we have great sensitivities around intrusive surveillance. So I think companies are going to need to think about how they use technology in this area. Again, we know that that leaders are really going to need to, in a hybrid situation, seek feedback and give feedback, and you know, and you can't sort of again rely on people being together and it just happening naturally. You have to sort of work out how to do that. It's so easy for people in a shared office to stop and chat and offer feedback or ideas, but this is more challenging in a remote environment. And I think as well, this whole thing about trusting people, maintaining trust and integrity. When you can't see people, I think leaders who try to sort of who feel uneasy about that may actually, you know, may overcompensate. So I think it'll be important for leaders to very clearly show that they trust their people until, you know, that trust for some reason is undermined. But to trust people, to be adults, to work responsibly, and to just look at how to help them to do that. So I think that you know, there will be, for hybrid working, there's definitely some challenges ahead, but I think there's some real opportunities ahead as well for companies to empower their teams and their workers. And then when they do bring people together, to really use that as a great opportunity to, you know, strengthen that sense of connection with the company, to really use those times to be enjoyable and to really stimulate sort of energy and perhaps collaboration and creativity. So challenges, but opportunities as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Marion. This was really interesting. If you were asked to give us one key takeaway, what would it be?
Yeah, I think, Camilla, I think this survey that we do, it's CEOs, the C-suite, and so therefore it's very much this perspective about what these top executives are doing and their priorities. I think it's important just to sort of maybe, I think for me personally, that to ground that in, but it's also about the workers in organizations. If you lead, people accept your leadership and they follow you. So it seems to me that there is also, as we come out of COVID, as companies rethink about culture, as they rethink about leadership, I think it's important for just individuals to also say, well, I have a role in this as well. I have a stake in saying and doing in order to, create a culture and a human-shaped organization, whatever that means to you, that, you and I, colleagues, we all have a responsibility in this area, and it's far too important to leave to the C-suite. I think to do it in partnership with the C-suite is a really important thing. So I think that's my main takeaway.
Okay. Thank you again, Marion, and thanks to our audience. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our Insight podcast series or explore the entire catalog or podcast programming from the Conference Board on our website. Thank you.
This has been Insights from the Conference Board.